Hello everyone, welcome to the monthly patron voted review. This one is interesting because rather than being a straight up review of a shmup as usually happens, today the patrons wanted me to do a comparison and discussion between Espgaluda 1 and Espgaluda 2. I think this is a really good topic because there is a lot of differences between these two games, even though they are part of the same series. And I also think it's good to talk about it because Espgaluda 2 especially doesn't get a whole lot of attention, and so I thought this would be a perfect opportune moment. And also to talk about one of the most underrated trilogies of trilogies, that being the ESP Trilogy. That's what I'm calling it, where Cave began with Espgaluda and then decided to create two spiritual successors where they don't have the same themes and styles as Espgaluda, which has a cool cyberpunk futuristic sort of Ghost in the Shell Akira vibe, which I'm a big fan of. Then with Espgaluda and Galuda 2, they kind of went for this fantasy steampunk, almost kind of like Final Fantasy VI sort of vibe, which is pretty cool as well. Of the series, I will say that Espgaluda is my favorite, but that is not the focus of today's video. So let's begin by talking about Espgaluda 1, where it all began, sort of the idea behind this. So what is interesting about Galuda 1, from what I understand, reading old articles and stuff about it, if I can remember correctly, is that Galuda 1 was created by Cave specifically to be an introductory bullet hell into the Cave library, because I'm sure as they're sitting down and cranking out all these masterpieces one after another, they all sat around and looked at each other and said, you know, these games are getting very, very difficult, and even though their quality is absolutely fantastic, I don't think a lot of new players are going to be able to get into these, especially in the arcade for the first time. So maybe we should come up with a shmup that's a little bit more accessible, and so that is Espgaluda. And by many metrics, from what I understand, if you're going for your first 1cc in Cave, Galuda 1 is the way to go, or maybe Mushi Original. Both of them are sort of made with this purpose, because not only is it toning down the bullet patterns and the enemy counts and all that sort of thing, but it also has a very interesting mechanic made specifically for this goal, which is the bullet time mechanic. Now, the mechanic has some kind of Japanese name. I'll show it on the screen here, but for the purpose of this video, let's just go ahead and call it the bullet time mechanic. So the way this works is you go ahead and press your C button, I think it is, or B button. I can't ever remember. Every time I hook up Galuda and the PGM, I always have to figure out which button is which. But basically, other than your bomb button, you have 3 buttons in the game rather than most Cave games, which have 2. You have your slowdown button, and it has a whole different meter than your bomb. It's not connected to that. So the way it works is whenever you're playing Galuda, you're flying around and you're shooting these popcorn enemies. They give you green gems. You build up the green gems, and then for scoring, this is kind of the rough outline of how scoring works. You build up your green gems, and then in the opportune moments, so usually when a lot of bullets are on screen, or if you're about to get a big juicy cancel, or if you're going to end a boss phase, I believe, that's when you go into bullet time mode, and then you pay it out for lots of gold, and then the gold builds up, and the gold increases your rank. I'm not sure if it increases your enemy count or bullet count. I'm assuming it does. And then from there, you can go ahead and keep cashing that in, and you can see how it builds up on itself and has this sort of nice landslide effect. I think the scoring system in Galuda is very clever and very cool, and I like it quite a bit. Very straightforward and simple, but effective. And so with that, we go to Espgaluda 2, and I'll get into more detail with survival and all that sort of thing in a little bit here. But then we go into Espgaluda 2, which is a pretty interesting departure, I would say, from Galuda 1 in many ways. It has the same foundation, of course, but a lot of things have changed, and I don't think it serves the same purpose. So I said earlier that Galuda 1 is, I believe, the easiest Cave 1cc, or one of the easier Cave 1cc's. It is that way by design, whereas Galuda 2 is not that way. It is actually not that easy of a game. They definitely turned up the base difficulty of the bullet patterns, of the enemy density, of the boss fights, all that sort of stuff. But while they're at it, they decided to also add a lot of extra scoring mechanics and mode mechanics, and it gets a little bit confusing. So I'll try my best to explain it. And I think the game that has the most similarity to Galuda 2 when it comes to scoring, at least from what I observed, is Futari. Galuda 2 did come before Futari, and I feel like it's a little bit of a precursor to that. I think they figured out a bunch of stuff in Galuda 2, honed it and refined it, and then created Futari's system sort of as a hybrid between what Mushi had going already and the ideas they explore here in this game. Of the two, I think Futari is the better game, but still Galuda 2 is pretty awesome. So the way it works is you do have your bullet time mechanic, your bomb mechanic, your shot, your rapid shot, just like you do in Galuda 1. But here's the big kicker: instead of having just one bullet time mode, you have 2 bullet time modes. So you have the original one, which you're used to. You just go ahead and press the slowdown button and you're off to the races. However, if you're going for scoring and if you're really smart about your routing and stuff, you'll go ahead and hold your bullet time button, and then you enter an extra bullet time mode. And the Japanese for these modes is absolutely absurd, so I'll just go ahead and show it on screen, and I'll go ahead and call this fierce bullet time. And the way this works is, yes, the bullets are slowing down, but you're not cashing them out for gold anymore. Instead, you're spending your gold and you're getting these massive multipliers. And I believe the bullets, rather than canceling, they spawn more bullets and you get these huge, absolutely absurd cancels. Definitely something very reminiscent of Futari. And so the scoring of this game is similar to the way it works in Galuda 1. However, you're much more calculated. It almost reminds me a little bit of Destiny as well, where the routing sort of comes down to managing your gold, managing your gems, and then cashing them out at opportune moments for these huge cancels with your fierce bullet time mode. So I think that is the basic gist of the way it works between the 2 scoring systems. Of the 2, I haven't explored Galuda 2 all that much for scoring, but in my personal opinion, I do prefer Galuda 1 in terms of scoring. I do think its style of scoring is a little bit more elegant than Espgaluda 2. Again, though, I'm not an expert in scoring in either of these games, so y'all can tune in. I believe Jamers also prefers Galuda 1, if I remember correctly. I went through his channel. He doesn't have a Galuda 2 video at the very least. I was hoping he did for annotations and guidance. But yeah, it is a little bit tricky to find out information about this game, which brings me to sort of the second topic of this video, because rather than just saying I like Galuda 1's scoring system better, I think we should also take a moment and evaluate them as overall packages. So the really cool thing about Galuda 1 is that it has a pretty solid PS2 port. I think you all will be happy to hear about that. You also can play it on the PGM via the bootleg cart, which is much cheaper. Of course, you can get the PCB. Galuda did not come to the Xbox 360. I could have sworn that it did. This is kind of like that, I can't remember that phenomenon, but it's the one where you think Sinbad was in a genie movie, but he wasn't. It's kind of like that, or the Berenstein Bears or whatever. I could have sworn Galuda 1 is on the Xbox 360, and every now and again I keep thinking it is, but no, it isn't. It's just on the PS2. Galuda 2 is on the Xbox 360. What's interesting about both of these releases is that these console ports are actually really good, both of them. So Galuda 1 on the PS2 runs really well from what I understand. I'm not sure how accurate the slowdown is. That's always an issue on the PS2, but I believe it is much more in line with arcade than something like Mushi on the PS2. And what's also really interesting about Galuda 1 on the PS2 is it has an arrange mode, and the arrange mode harkens back much more towards Esperade. And from what I understand, I've heard many people comment that it is probably one of the best arranges Cave ever made, and it is really interesting. And I think it's kind of that bridge between the Esperade style and Galuda style, which I really appreciate. And so I think I'll probably end up making its own separate video on this. But that is a huge bonus, as well as getting Galuda on the PS2. As far as Espgaluda 2 on the Xbox 360, this release is kind of ridiculous, the amount of content it includes. In fact, I don't think it has a rival other than maybe Dodonpachi Daifukatsu or Dodonpachi Resurrection. It has a lot of modes. So it has the arcade mode, it has an Xbox 360 mode, it has a Black Label mode, and it has an arrange mode. And it is pretty interesting the differences and changes that make upon these modes. I'm not entirely sure how well done they are as compared to arrange on Espgaluda 1, but I do think they are really interesting and they are pretty fun to play. Overall, the difficulty of them is easier from what I can understand than the arcade mode, especially the arrange mode, which has some shades of Ikaruga. So I guess I'll run down a little bit about the modes. So Black Label Espgaluda 2 changes up the scoring system. It pushes it even further. That's kind of how I've noticed Black Label arranges work in Cave, like DFK Black Label, where it boosts up the cancels, it boosts up the scoring. You're just letting it all hang out. It also has this really interesting mechanic where when the bullets fly towards you, you have this little tiny shield type bubble around you. It's hard to explain, but basically you can kind of push the bullets aside, sort of like in Zero Ranger when you have your sword and you're swinging your sword and you can kind of hold the bullets in place and sort of push them aside. It's not as effective as the sword, but basically it makes this kind of interesting bubble-ish feel where you're going through the patterns and you can kind of slide through them in weird ways. Basically the way it works is if you get caught up, if the bullet gets caught up on you, then it damages you and hurts you. So you're not invincible or anything like that, but it's much more lenient than arcade mode. So I think that's a nice little concession they added, and it's a unique mechanic I haven't really seen in other games that I can think of. You also play as a different character, and you get auto cancels as well, kind of like in Black Label on DFK, where certain enemies just shoot them and it cancels. As far as the nitty-gritty for the scoring of these modes, I went down and looked through it for a while, and it started to be like, okay, it's hard to follow after a bit. So if you really want to dig into the scoring of these games, I definitely recommend it. I don't think they are as well explored for scoring, especially as Cave's other titles, which is kind of interesting, maybe because there are ranges and Japanese players don't tend to play ranges. I was looking at the arcade scoring, and what's interesting is it looks like someone has come fairly close to getting a counter stop in arcade, so maybe that'll happen in the future. I'm assuming it's probably possible based on how close they are. And so let's end this video by talking a little bit about the baseline experience, the sort of level design, the survival, and sort of give my thoughts on which one you want to go with. I feel like playing Espgaluda 1 personally was much more fun. I like the level design quite a bit more. The boss fights I think are a lot more fun. The trade-off with Galuda 1 though is it is easier than Galuda 2. No doubt it is a much easier game. However, there is kind of a fun mechanic that you can do in Galuda 1 and Galuda 2, which is if you keep the bullet time mode going for a long time, you run out of your meter and then the bullets turn red. And rather than going back to the normal pace, when you're in this overheat mode, basically, the bullets move faster and it removes the slowdown. So you can kind of play Galuda 1 in this mode. I think people have done clears like this, which is pretty impressive, where they're basically playing the game at high speed. I don't know how much this helps your scoring at some point. It is kind of interesting. So if you're in this mode for a little bit in Galuda 1, it raises your rank up and everything, and it does improve your scoring. Then after you die, you have to raise it up. From what I understand in Galuda 2, based on some videos and commentary that I was watching and guides I'm reading, again, this is all kind of a little bit hazy. In Galuda 2, once you get that leveled up in stage 1, it doesn't matter if you die or not. You don't have to do it again. It just stays there. And from what I understand, reading through as many notes as I could, it doesn't seem like rank plays a big role in Galuda 2 like it does in Galuda 1. Instead, it seems like really when it comes down to scoring, it's all about knowing that fierce bullet time mode and getting that lined up and managing your gold and managing your gems. That's kind of where it's at. Whereas in Galuda 1, it's a little bit more, you can play with the rank a little bit more and stuff like that. If you're looking for your first 1cc, I would say Galuda 1 is definitely the way to go. Galuda 2 is quite a bit harder. I didn't end up getting a 1cc for Galuda 2, but I could see it being pretty possible. So of the two, both are very valuable, both are well designed. I would say the problem with Galuda 2 as compared to Galuda 1 is I think it is a little bit sort of lost. It kind of lost what it's trying to do. It's a little bit confused, where Galuda 1 I think does a very good job of what it sets out to do, which is introducing people to bullet hells, being fairly simple, having some cool little tricks here and there, having some fun scoring mechanics, and being enjoyable to play for score while also being approachable. Whereas Galuda 2 kind of is in the middle, where I don't think playing it for score is quite as popular as many of Cave's peers, such as Mushi Futari, for example. But at the same time, it's not that popular for people playing it for survival either. I think it's kind of this strange middle ground between the two. Still a very good game. Of the two though, if I was going to give my final verdict, especially when you count in the PS2 Arrange, which I'll have to do a video on, I would say Galuda 1 is the winner in my book as being my favorite of the two. But I would say if you have an Xbox 360, and I think you can play it on Xenia now, definitely check out Espgaluda 2 because it has a lot of content and there's a lot to explore there. So yeah, I hope this helps everyone kind of clarify my thoughts on Espgaluda 1 versus Espgaluda 2. Both very fine games if you're trying to decide one or the other, maybe to buy on the PS2 or to buy on the 360. Hopefully this information can help you out. And I think people who enjoy Futari and enjoy that style of Cave probably should give Galuda 2 a second look, because I think it is a sort of precursor to what was to come, and it is a really cool game. So yeah, shout outs to the patrons, and if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Adios, everyone. So thank you to 72 PCT Water, Adam Pearson, Adrian Reyes, Eternal Solitude, Ilkshay Wadker, Dingo, Handicapped, Anthony A, Ben Win, Borgie22, Brian Reboot, Brian Shiver, Corio, Danielle Savage, Delta Tango 6, Disco Star Slayer, Dominic NG, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Geriatric Donmaku, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JBRPG, Joe Angelo, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Geekoman589, Luridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Meher Kalendrian, Minung, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, N Electron, 9, Okalakuglas, Philip Mason, Portal 63, RamQ, Raul, Realskeen, Sketchy Raccoon, The Boot Rex, TRM, Sugumo, Plasmo, Yishi, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.